All right, so we're going to skip ahead to argument number 13 on Kraft's list, the ontological argument. Now, the ontological argument was originally developed by Saint Anselm. Um, it's a well, okay, actually, it was not originally developed by Saint Anselm. It was originally developed by Ibn Sina, the medieval Iranian philosopher, but it came to Christian civilization through Saint Anselm. So it's a very hard argument. Professional philosophers are still debating and discussing it. Thomas Aquinas himself didn't agree with it. He didn't think it was a good argument. I don't claim to know everything about the argument. Um, I've heard too many lectures on it to think that, but I'm gonna try and show how it works. So, Kraft lays out Anselm's version of the argument. It is greater for a thing to exist in the mind and in reality than the mind alone. God means that than which a greater cannot be thought. Suppose that God exists in the mind but not in reality, then a greater than God could be thought, namely a being that is all the qualities of thought of God plus real existence. But this is impossible, for God is that than which a greater cannot be thought. Therefore, God exists in the mind and in reality. So you could see how this would run into some problems. The first issue is a definition, that which nothing greater can be conceived. This is a very important distinction to make. So let's look at English grammar real quick, and Latin grammar apply here too. You need to know the difference between a comparative and a superlative. Comparison is, this donut is better than all the donuts. The superlative is, this is the greatest of all donuts. So, Anselm is not saying that a God is a being greater than all other beings, but the greatest being, which requires no comparison because God is the greatest whether or not any other beings exist. So we're not comparing one being in a set of all beings. We're not comparing all the donuts in the box. We are comparing sort of the eternal donut, as it were. There doesn't need to be any other donuts. I can't believe I just compared God to a donut. But, Saint Anselm had a colleague in the monastery, and colleague is the right term, who posed the problem that basically amounted to, well, I can think of an island which is better than every other island, and since it's better to exist than not to exist, then the perfect island must exist. So, if you were paying attention, you probably, hopefully picked up on the point that he's missing his Gaunilla with the monk. He's missing the point of the argument. He's thinking in terms of the comparative. He creates a scenario where there is an island that is comparatively greater than all other islands, and he thinks that by using Anselm's logic, he demonstrates that it must exist. But this is not what Anselm was doing at all. Rather, he is making an argument in terms of the superlative. God is the greatest regardless of any comparison to other beings. So what makes God different from an island? The difference, and Anselm does this in the next chapter of his book where this is taken from, and you need this to make any sense of the ontological argument. Anselm defines God as a necessary being, and a necessary being is a being that either exists or is impossible. If it is possible for God to exist, then God exists. It is in the very nature of a necessary being to exist. God's nature, so God's nature is being. So the difference between this and an island greater than other islands is that it's not in the nature of islands to exist. Nothing about island means exists. But exists is built into the definition of God. And you might say, well, what if I conceive of an island that exists? What if my definition of island means exists? Well, here we need to look at the word conceive. So we talked about God is that than which nothing greater can be conceived. So what the point Anselm would make is that there are two ways to speak of the word conceive. You can either use the word conceive to mean say a word or to mean make a coherent account. You can conceive of the phrase God does not exist. You can conceive of the phrase existence is built into the definition of island. And this is, you could say the words, you can string it together. You can also conceive in this sense of a square circle or of dehydrated water or just about any set of words you want to put together. This does not mean you can conceive of the phrase God does not exist in a coherent way, in the same way you cannot make a coherent account of a square circle or of dehydrated water. That we're not talking about just imagining something. We're thinking about making a coherent account of it. We can conceive of God as the greatest being. We can conceive of God as the necessary being. That means we can make a coherent account of God in this manner. And the fact that we can do this is a way that is a means of letting us demonstrate the existence of God. That we can conceive of God, we can make a coherent account of God where God is a necessary being. It is better that the necessary being exists than to not exist. And we can show the existence of God from here. It's a difficult argument. Not everybody accepts it, even within the church. But you can get a lot of use out of it. And Anselm will go on to explain how if God is a necessary being, then all of the attributes of God follow from that. That you can show that you can show, for example, that the opposite necessary is contingent. So, for example, there's only one God, and you can show this because if you were to introduce something to make two gods distinct, you'd be introducing a contingency, which would make it not necessary being. So that's how you can do that. It's not necessarily the way I would go and do it, but it can be done. So that's the ontological argument, and we'll pick up with more arguments next week.